Can you hear me? All right, thank you. In my prayer just now, I ask, what is the best way to handle this situation? I prepared as an academic to wow you with information that you probably already know. But I think that what's more important is something that I just learned about an hour ago when I sat in the author's lounge and I asked 5 young women what they wanted to know. And they asked a lot of questions, and some of them are here. So I'm going to do what women resistors often do. I'm going to subvert the agenda of this panel. Would you mind? Clap. You can clap. Go ahead and clap. You don't even know what I mean by that, but let me tell you what I mean. Is that I think it would be more of a learning moment for you to ask us questions about why we wrote autobiography, right? I think that's important. And I think from that we can generate some discussions. So may at least I frame the ideas in the way that they operate in the academic setting, and I will be brief. Is that okay? And then I want to see by a show of hands who's willing to ask these powerful women here and myself, since we have all written autobiographies, right? I know. I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Everybody's going to introduce yourself. The questions. Who's willing to do that? Raise your hand. Are you willing to ask a question? Okay, that's what's important. I think that will generate more of a learning moment for all of us so that we can see similarities and differences. So I'm going to start with a brief introduction and have each of them very briefly, in whatever language you choose, to introduce yourself, okay? My name is Kesho Scott. I was born and raised in the United States. I have a political activist background. I'm a community organizer, and for a living, I am an academic. But my heart, my soul, and my mind belongs to my community.
किश्वर नाहीद तो आपकी अपनी है। जब कहेंगे कि बात करो उर्दू में तो उर्दू में कर लूँगी, जब ये कहेंगे अंग्रेज़ी बोलो तो अंग्रेज़ की तरह बोल लूँगी कुछ थोड़ी थोड़ी, और नज़में सुना दूँगी साथ में। बस ये मेरा तारुफ है।
मेरा नाम अतिया दाऊद है और मैं भी आप लोगों की अपनी ही हूँ, और ईश्वर और फ़हमीदा के साए तले जो है वो बढ़कर यहाँ तक पहुँची हूँ। तो मैं उर्दू में ही बात करूँगी, और अगर चाहें तो सिंधी में।
मैं अज़रा अब्बास हूँ। मुझे ना इंग्लिश बोलना आती है ना सुनना आती है। आई एम सॉरी। और मैंने ये केशू से कह दिया है कि मुझे ना इंग्लिश सुनना आती है ना बोलना आती है। तो ये जो मेरी आधी जान है, जिन्होंने मुझसे बग़ैर पूछे ट्रांसलेशन किया अपनी मोहब्बत में, तो अब इनको
मेरी जुर्रत
तो मैंने कहा तुम आओ और मेरी मदद करो, इसलिए कि मुझे इंग्लिश सुनना भी नहीं आती।
तो जो ख़वातीन यहाँ बैठी हुई हैं वो खैर मेरी जान है, मैं और क्या कह सकती हूँ। मेरी भी ज़िंदगी की कहानी है जैसे इन्होंने अपनी लिखी, मगर मैंने अभी नहीं लिखी। तो मैं यहाँ पे हूँ मदद के लिए। अगर कुछ ये लोग कहना चाहें तो मैं ये नहीं कहती कि मैं तर्जुमा करूँगी, मगर मफ़हूम ज़रूर सुना सकती हूँ। और if you like in English, I am here to assist and help, because like all women and men, I guess, we have a story to tell, and I'm here to help all my sisters and friends here, assist them in getting their story across. think so.
Okay, so I will start with my brief introduction. I wanted to do this panel for 4 reasons. One, I wanted to learn about Pakistani women's autobiography to contribute to a course that I'm teaching on global feminisms. 2, can you help me? 2, I wanted to examine if their individual stories might instruct, like a well-designed syllabus, a set of lessons of those people who experience their lives as the other gender, right? And maybe those lessons could tell us something about Pakistani society, could tell us something about the global north that I come from, the things that we can learn from this culture and this society, which is much older than the United States, and also what we could learn about the possibility, theoretically and in practice, of a global sisterhood. Now, most of you may not know that autobiography, as a literary form, is mostly male. Raise your hand if you knew this. Please raise your hand. It's mostly what men did. Help me out, okay? All right. How many people know that it was generally the literary form of the elite? Raise your hand. They got to write, right? While everybody else worked. How many people know that it was the literary field of those who were raced white? I come from a segregated, racially segregated society, so it was mostly raced white. How many people know that it was in a colonizer's voice, often? Raise your hand. And how many people also would be honest to admit that it was the privileged men of color, it was also their domain, also? Raise your hand. Is that not true? All right. So I wanted to know why these women here wrote their individual stories. And the more that I have been here in this very short time, and the more that I have read, I think that we have similarities in our stories. If I had to give this panel a subtitle, I want to be honest with you. And that is that the new subtitle for this panel is a defense of women's autobiography. The defense of our individual stories. So let me tell you 5 reasons. And if it makes sense to you, say yes. Can you practice that? Say yes. Yes. I didn't hear you. Yes. You got it. So here is my defense. Number 1, why women's autobiography is important. Number 1, we are and have always been the subject of life.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Because we make society too. Yes. We've made it in the past, we make it in the future. And we are responsible for what happens. Any yeses? Yes. All right, number 2. There is no objective first.
Yes.
Thank you. There is no object best. This is better than that in terms of life experiences. There is, in my mind, no division between the lives we live because our lives are intersected. Let me say this. I don't get to leave my womanness at home. They don't get to leave their Pakistaniness at home. They have to carry it everywhere that they go, and so do I. So I am black, I am female, I grew up poor, I'm an American. All of those things make my identity. So this idea of some objectivity that stands out there by itself, in my mind, is really a reduplication of the patriarchal institutions and systems of oppression. Yes. Thank you. All right, number 3, women's lives they're valuable, but it is because they have relationships with each other. Hold hands. Hold my hand. Hold her hand. Everybody hold hands. Hold hands. The difference between the way that women experience their lives is that they do it relationally. And this has been an invisible part of history that has not been recorded. That maybe this relationalness has something to offer society. Is there a yes? Yes. Thank you very much. And finally, those with the most societal privilege, past or present, aren't the only people who theorize. Is that true?
Yes.
That means your thinking can be part of theory. Is that not true? That your resistance and your activism can be part of theory too, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. People who have privilege are not the only one who can lead. Is that true? Yes. Are people who don't have privilege, people who have privilege, are the only ones who can inspire? No. In fact, in me reading these women's lives, and by the way, I read 5 times more than they read, they inspired me. So I think what would be fitting is that we start with putting away this angst about autobiography. And I'm going to go through the academic part very fast, and then we're going to turn to questions, all right? One of the things is that women's autobiography is a new genre. It began to emerge in the 80s.
Can I just say something?
No, let me finish. You will be able to share, okay? All right. Yeah. So, one of the things I want to say is that we can put away the debates about autobiography that has to do, not that they're not important, but I want to draw from the experience that these women have lived in telling their stories, because I think these individual stories are important. So this idea of experience and agency, memory and truth, authenticity, front story, back story, cultural secrets, ranking, all of those things are part of what are emerging in this genre. But women are telling their stories to meet each one of those things. So what I thought is that we might start with a series of questions. I'm going to flip the switch and only ask one question between us, and then I'm going to turn it over to you to ask questions. Is that okay? So that you get to ask what you want to know from our varied experiences and our comparative experiences. And which of you brought something to read? Which of you brought something to read?
Didn't bring the book. I'll read a poem.
Okay. All right. So that I think it would be fitting in a panel like this to also hear a little bit about our stories. And our poems. Okay? All right. So here is my first question. Since autobiography is a new literary genre for women, women have always written poems, stories, letters, journals. Those things have been buried and they have been invisible. And what we are knowing is that they are coming out of that invisibility and become part of this thing that we now get a chance to read and reflect upon. But here is my first question to any of you. Why did this form, why was this the form that helped best tell your story? Why was autobiography the best form for helping to tell your story?
Me?
Yep.
Okay, right. My story starts from 1940, when I was born. There comes Second World War, there comes Pakistan movement, there come migration, there come atrocities, both sides, India and Pakistan. And then comes me as a person who is starting to live, to be educated, to go ahead. And forbidden thing was poetry, that my all family told, no one in your family is like you. Why do you want to stay like this? This is shameful for us to say the girl is a poet, because it's the statue of men, not statue of women. So this starts from there. It is actually 50 years what Pakistani women had spent by that time that I was born to 90. So this was 50 years history of Pakistani women that I have written in first person. And that's all.
Pass it. Thank you.
मेरी कहानी उस वक्त शुरू होती है जब गांव में मेरे बाप की वफ़ात हो जाती है। इसलिए कि एक औरत का होना, फिर एक तो गरीब ख़ानदान हो और फिर उसके बाद जो है एक बाप चला जाए और एक जो अन्ना होती है अंदर से वो टूटने लगे, तो उस तरह से मेरी कहानी शुरू हो जाती है। मेरा बाप मुल्ला था और हम मुल्ला घराने में थे और मेरा जो है मस्जिदों, फिर हम लोग जब दूसरे शहरों में जाते थे तो मस्जिदों के हिजरे में मेरी परवरिश हुई, लेकिन मुझे पता भी नहीं था कि ये सारी चीज़ें जो मुझे कहीं पर भी मार नहीं रही थी, ख़त्म नहीं कर रही थी, क्योंकि वहाँ पर जो है कि अदबी सोच पल रही थी वहाँ मस्जिदों के हिजरों में भी, जो कि अब शहरों में भी वो नहीं होता। तो इस तरह से जो है मेरी कहानी आगे बढ़ी और मुझे गांव में रहकर पता चल गया कि मुझे मतलब ना मैंने फेमिनिज़म पढ़ा था, ना मेरी माँ पढ़ी लिखी थी, लेकिन एक सोच थी मेरा अपने ऊपर एतमाद कि क्यों जो है ना सवालात जो कुदरती तौर पर मेरे अंदर से उठते थे कि लड़के के लिए 2 बकरे क्यों, मेरे लिए 1 बकरा क्यों, क्या मैं कम हूँ किसी चीज़ से, इस तरह की सोच मेरे अंदर पलती रही। और उसके बाद हम लोग शहर में आए और यही था कि एक मिडिल क्लास की या गरीब ख़ानदान की औरतें जो रिहर्सल मतलब आकर जब ज़िंदगी में के साथ जुड़ती हैं तो उनकी ज़िंदगी और ज़्यादा मुश्किल होती है। और इस तरह से फिर मैंने 42 साल की उम्र में अपनी ऑटोबायोग्राफ़ी लिखी और मुझे ये महसूस हुआ कि मुझे ये सारे तजर्बात जो है वो शेयर करना चाहिए, क्योंकि एक औरत होना ही मुश्किल है, फिर उसके साथ इतने सारे जो है आपकी तजर्बात हों और मुश्किल से मुश्किल ज़िंदगी हो, तो इसलिए मैंने लिखा।
Do you want me to translate?
Yes.
Kesho, yeah. Well, very briefly, she said what she said, that she was born poor and born in a village. Her father was a religious leader, a mullah, a Maulvi, and she says that she had no formal training in feminism, but she recognized injustice when she saw it. For example, when a daughter is born, you sacrifice 1 goat, and when a son is born, you sacrifice 2. And there were many other life experiences. She moved from the village to the town, and at the age of 42, she decided to tell her story.
पहले तुमने माइक्रोफोन को नाराज किया।
ये क्या हो गया? मैंने क्यों लिखना शुरू किया? जब मैं अपने बच्चों को डांटती थी, बेटी को बेटियों को, ये करो वो करो, मैं ये करती थी मैं वो करती थी, तो मेरी बेटी ने कहा कि अम्मा अब आप सुनाएंगी नहीं, अब आप हमें लिख के दें कि अब आप लिख के दें हमें कि आप क्या करती थी। तो मैंने कहा ये तो सही है, तो मैंने लिखना शुरू कर दिया। अब जब वो पढ़ चुकी तो कहने लगी अम्मा ये तो आप हमें बगावत पुकसा रही हैं, अगर हमने ऐसा करना शुरू कर दिया तो आप हमारे साथ क्या सलूक करेंगी? तो मैंने कहा बेटा वही सलूक करूँगी जो मेरे बाप ने मेरे साथ किया। तो इस तरह शुरू किया। जब पहले शुरू किया तो फिर वो जो याददाश्तें थी या जो यादें थी जो मेरे लिए बहुत अच्छी थी, जब मैं परेशान होती थी, जब मैं उलझती थी अपने हालात से, तो मैं अपने बचपन में जाती थी और वहाँ से एक हिस्सा उठाकर ले आती थी और लिख देती थी।
Please translate.
मेरे पास है, ये तुम रखो अपने पास. Azra says that when she was scolding her daughters as they were growing up, and she would tell them, oh well, I did this and I did that, and they said, well, I think it's time you put it down on paper. I guess they didn't believe her, but anyway, she decided to put it down in paper, and when they read it, they said, oh, what a story. You're coaxing us to be rebellious. You're pointing the way to rebellion. And she said, the daughters asked, so how will you treat us? And she said, I'll treat you the way that my father treated me.
Okay. Thank you. I'll answer that question myself. I think autobiography for me was a form of telling the truth.
That's it.
And I have to say that when I write serial autobiography. So I write stories about my life when I was young, stories about my life as an activist, and I'm now finishing the stories of my life as a 64-year-old woman. A woman who has 4 children and has 6 grandchildren. Because the struggle doesn't stop against injustice. So autobiography was the best form for me because it was the way for me to tell my internal story as someone who grew up in a racially segregated society in America, and to tell the story of the resistance that I was met when I was trying to make democracy work in my own country.
Yeah.
And second, I wanted to leave a legacy to my children. I wanted them to know that all that time that I was not at home, that I was at the meetings, is that I was doing it for some particular reason. That's me.
Yeah.
Thank you. I want to do one more round of questions that we can share in common, and then I want to open it up to you to ask questions. Is that okay? All right. So I also grew up poor. My mother raised me as a single parent. My mother was one of the first women in her community to be divorced, which was seen as a negative thing. I grew up with the reputation of being a badass, which I learned from my mother, who resisted oppression. My mother had a 10th grade education, and yet she was able to raise 3 children to get an advanced education without any public assistance. So the idea that my mother had this powerful habit of surviving was what I wrote about in graduate school. And that was important. That all my lessons didn't come from books, that my lessons came from the lives that women lived. And those women were also the mothers of sons. So my mother raised some incredible sons also, not just women. So as I read your work, I also realized that we had so much in common because you were raised by families. Many of you dedicated your work to your families. So one of the things that I would like each of us to share is one very brief story of something that is a strategy or a habit of surviving that women do in cultures like ours. And that is, we make a way out of no one. Make a way out of no way. I want you to repeat this. We make a way out of no way. Because that is you don't have to say this part, because that is our existence. We do a dance in a way in which it doesn't appear that there is a solution, but we find one. And this is what I think we have in common. So from your autobiography, would you share a very brief story?
I'll tell you what is from my book. मेरे घर में जब बहुत ज़्यादा दात हुए कि पढ़ने के सिलसिले में, तो वो भूख हड़ताल करके मास्टर्स करने की इजाज़त मिल गई। पर जब शायरी करते हुए और ज़िंदगी में इधर उधर घूमते हुए जब पता चला कि मेरे लिए ये सब ख़राब है क्योंकि मैं ठीक नहीं हूँ, फिर मैंने अपने आप से मुकालमा किया, अगर मैं शायरी छोड़ दूँ तो क्या अच्छी औरत बन जाऊँगी? दिल ने जवाब दिया नहीं। फिर मैंने सवाल किया अपने आप से कि क्या मैं नौकरी छोड़ दूँ अच्छी बीवी बन जाऊँगी? जवाब आया नहीं। फिर मैंने सवाल किया कि अगर मैं कुछ भी ना करूं और सिर्फ हंडिया पकाऊं, जो मैं तब भी पकाती थी और पकाती रही हूं सारी ज़िंदगी, और बॉसों ने मेरे खाना चखा भी है, तो मैंने कहा फिर क्या होगा? फिर मैंने कहा फिर मैं पागल खाने में होंगी। तो मैंने कहा फ़ैसला ये किया कि इन सारी तज़ादात के साथ, इन सारी ऑब्स्टिकल्स के साथ मैंने ज़िंदा रहना है, और मेरा एक काम है, वो है लिखना। सारी उम्र लिखना, चाहे दफ्तर से मार पड़े, चाहे शौहर से मार पड़े, चाहे बच्चों से मार पड़े, चाहे माशरे से मार पड़े। बस
Will you translate? Will Kishwar do her own translation? You,
किताब नहीं है ना यहाँ?
नहीं, what you just said.
नहीं, एक दफ़ा बोल दिया, बस बोल दिया।
नहीं, but for Kesho. Brief.
तुम कर दो।
Okay.
Briefly, I think I'm seeing that we have 15 more minutes for our panel. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
To wrap it up, even though it started late?
No, it's 3:30. We could go up to 3:30.
All right, okay, I just...
So because we'll be repeating ourselves, do you
Okay.
want a translation? She just asked herself some fundamental questions.
Yeah.
That will I be a better woman if I don't write? Will I be a better woman if I don't do
Right.
the following? And the answer was no. And so she continued to write,
All right.
in a nutshell.
मेरी ऑटोबायोग्राफी में जो मुझे सबसे ज़्यादा सवाल किया गया और सारी वो चीज़ थी मेरे इश्क के हवाले से, जो शादी से पहले किया मैंने। तो उसमें उसका जो हीरो करार देते हैं काफ़ी लोग वो मेरे शोहर को, कि वो कितना अजीम है कि उसने एक मोहब्बतशुदा औरत से शादी की, एक
मोहब्बतशुदा
तलाकशुदा एक तलाकशुदा होती है, एक मोहब्बतशुदा। तो असल में मेरे शोहर का मेरे साथ क्या ताल्लुक़ है, वो एक बहुत हमारा मजबूत रिश्ता है, लेकिन ये क्रेडिट भी एक मर्द को जाता है कि एक उस तरह की औरत से, ये एक मर्द की अजमत समझी जाती है जिसने एक इश्क़-शुदा औरत से शादी की, जबकि इश्क औरत का भी हक़ है, मर्द का भी हक़ है जिस तरह से। और मैं समझती हूँ ये सिर्फ मेरा क्रेडिट है कि मैंने मोहब्बत की, और ये मेरा क्रेडिट है कि मैं उसको उस मोहब्बत को छोड़ के अपने शोहर से जितना भी साथ सच्चाई से निभाया, ये एक मेरा एज औरत क्रेडिट जाता है।
Yes, Attiya says that among all that she's written about her life, what people have commented on most is a love affair that she had before she married.
Right.
And people think her husband is a wonderful person because he accepted that. And he married her despite that. And so all the credit for greatness and generosity of spirit and all the rest goes to her husband.
No.
No. But she says that is not so. Yes. Kishwar is right, that's what she says. She says, but that is not so. Because my husband and I have a good friendship and a relationship, and the credit for that goes to me.
And
Yes.
that is a way out of no way, right? Yes, go for it. Go ahead.
मैंने कभी नहीं चाहा
हाँ,
कि लोग मुझे अच्छा कहें, और जब कोई कहता था कितनी अच्छी है तो मुझे इतना गुस्सा आता था कि ये क्या बकवास है, मैं अच्छी। लिहाजा मैंने शुरू से लेकर और आज तक वो कुछ कहा, वो कुछ किया जो लोग मुझे बुरा कहते रहे, लेकिन किसी कमबख्त ने मुझे बुरा नहीं कहा अच्छा ही है, सही है। मैंने कोई बगावत नहीं की। लोग कहते हैं बगावत की, लेकिन कोई नहीं। मैंने बस ये किया कि अब जा रही हूँ सड़क पे तो एक कुत्ता खड़ा है तो मैं उस कुत्ते से कहूँगी हट जा भाई, तो हट गया। एक पत्थर मिला, मैंने पत्थर को अपनी टांग से करके उठा लिया, तो मेरे रास्ते में कोई रुकावट नहीं आई। और अगर कोई रुकावट आती तो फिर क्या होता ये मुझे नहीं पता।
Azra says that she is considered rebellious, but actually she has not been rebellious. She has just walked her path. And if something stood in her way, if there was a dog or a puppy or a stone or something, she just asked it to move.
Alrighty.
And okay, she didn't ask it to move, she gave it a kick. And she went on in her own way. So she doesn't know why people think of her as a rebel, because she just followed her path.
Thank you. So maybe we can assess that in writing autobiography, we're able to see women's innovation as opposed to calling them rebels, right? That we're able to see that in their making a way out of no way, they might be setting an example for others in society. Because again, knowledge is not produced by just one gender. It is produced by all of them. And your country has 3 identified genders, mine doesn't yet. So let me tell you what I think is an incredible example for me, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. Is that okay? I remember when I was in graduate school, and for those of you who've had the privilege of getting a BA and an MA and a PhD, at least in my country, the more that you go to school, the more that you're taught by people who don't look like you, who don't have your experience, and don't often value your experience. So here I was in a PhD program, and I was at that point where I was about to write my proposal for my thesis. And I decided that I was going to write about the women who had taught me the habit of surviving. My mother, my grandmother, right? And I was also going to talk about how in what they taught me, I then taught my daughters. So I also interviewed my daughters at that time in my book. And I remember sitting around this committee of people. They were all white, they were all males, and they told me I could not do this. Now what I wanted to do was I wanted to do something which was inappropriate, which was curse them out and whip their ass. I could not do that because I had to think of the situation that I was in. You know, that my common welfare of my children was also important, that I needed to finish this program so that I could go about my career. But they were not allowing me to have the privilege that everyone else had, to write what I thought was significant. So I took a deep breath. I remembered what my grandmother told me about hold your row to the end. You know, a boat, when you're trying to get on the other side of the river, you have to hold your row and keep rowing. My goal was to finish that program. So I specifically decided to give them a political lesson that day. And that lesson was that they could not define what I was going to write. They did not know my experience. And if they, in fact, wanted to grow, they ought to support me in writing what I thought was important about Black experience for America. All right, we're going to open it up to you for questions. Yes.
Yes, I just want to say
Here.
which is this is fascinating. I have had the privilege of knowing some of the the women on this panel, and hearing you, and also because I live in America and I teach there. So one of the things that's opened up in this conversation for me, and I wonder if you might address that, is that the approach, even though you've all faced obstacles, right? And then that is in a way a prompt for your creative work, which is also a kind of a work to set some sort of a model out there for other women, yeah? But each of the panelists from Pakistan really does embrace the word rebel. That is my understanding, that rebellion is in fact extremely important as a strategy, as something to own, because that is what's going to get people riled up and say we are not going to behave the way good women, proper women, etc. needs to behave. Whereas I think what I hear from you, Kesho, is that your strategy has had to be somewhat different, not accommodating necessarily, because you've done what you needed to do, but there's a practical element there that you keep referring to, which I think has to do very much with being a racialized Black body in America. I think that there is some difference there, and I would like to see that addressed by each of you. Thank you.
We may not have time for each of us to do it, but I want to show you something. Can you come up? Come, watch this. Come on. Put this down. You notice how young people always have their phones. Push up, push against me, push. All relationships involve power.
Wow.
Relationships involve power. And there can be more than one strategy of how to deal with them. So it's not that one is better than another. It is true, I lived in a racialized society, which meant I always had to deal with issues of race as well as issues of gender discrimination. But I always had to deal with power. And what I learned in their stories is that they always also had to deal with relationships of power. Thank you. Share, go ahead and share your... Go ahead. Yes.
करो मैं तो क्या किस हवाले से करना है बोलो 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 जो सवाल करेगी तो मुझे
वहाँ से सवाल आएगा या यहाँ से
Yes.
आएगा?
Did you want to say something, or should we get another question? Okay, another question. Go ahead.
सवाल
But can you answer the next? Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum. Once your work was published, how did you deal with controversy as well as being recognized in public all the time?
जो है मेरी ऑटोबायोग्राफी पर इतनी ज़्यादा तनकीद नहीं हुई, सिवाय इसके कि जो हमारे सर्कल है उसके अंदर लोग पूछते थे और उनमें सबसे ज़्यादा बस क्यूरियोसिटी ये थी, जो नाम मैंने छुपाए थे ना, वो एक दूसरे से पूछ रहे थे कि जिसका लव अफेयर था उसका असल नाम क्या है। और तो वो फिर मैंने अपने काफ़ी करीबी दोस्तों से कहा यार मुझसे डायरेक्ट पूछ लो, इतनी मेहनत करने की ज़रूरत नहीं। बाकी ओवरऑल ये नहीं था। और मुझे परवाह थी सिर्फ 3 लोगों की, 2 मेरी बेटियां और एक मेरा शौहर। और मुझे पता था कि इन लोगों को कोई तकलीफ़ नहीं है इस चीज़ से और इस तरह से, तो मुझे ओवरऑल कोई तकलीफ़ नहीं हुई।
I'll answer briefly that question in this way, that after I wrote my autobiography, some of the people who didn't like it the most were people in my family, right? Because their script of how they survived was different than my script, right? But what it did do was open up conversations within the family and gave names to the behaviors that we engaged in to survive. And that opened for new consciousness in my family and gave me the courage to then do it.
माइक है
मेरे पास नहीं है।
ये नहीं यहाँ पे।
You see, my book, Bad Woman Story, पूरी औरत की कथा, was first printed. I sent the script to both Indian publisher and Pakistani publisher both. Pakistani publisher डर गए, and he didn't publish the book. The Indian publisher did in 1 month, and the book, almost 1,000, was available in Pakistan. Now everybody, including men and women, my friends also, they said something. If Pakistan is not getting printed, it means something wrong is in this script. Pada. After 2 months, book from Pakistan also published. Now they are comparing the 2 books, and they say, इसमें कुछ और होगा, इसमें कुछ और होगा. And they were amazed that it is the same book. Why the publisher was not printing? The poor guy was scared about sex, about education, about Maulvi, about Ziaul-Haq, everything he was afraid of. And then the behavior of co-writers of Pakistan, how they behave about women writers, how they talk about them in their absence, and when they are present, how they behave gently. So all this I have written about it. So now afterwards they said, अच्छा बता दो इस किताब में क्या नहीं है और उस किताब में क्या नहीं. What I said, in this book, what is printed in Pakistan, one name is missing. When I say my colleague writers, and that is Salman Rushdie. That is missing because Pakistani publisher said, please, nikal do. And the second thing is that when I wrote that at Cordoba, I was sitting with my son and having wine. They said, please, wine ka lafz nikal do. So these are the 2 changes in the Pakistani edition and the Indian edition.
Thank you. I just want to say that my first book was published by a feminist press. For almost the same reason. So for those of you who don't decide to be writers, be editors and be publicists. And that way we're guaranteed that our work is then done. Next question, I think.
Yeah, I guess primarily in your case, Dr. Scott, you had to deal with custody of other people taking you custody at 2 levels, being an African American, then again, being as a woman. In Pakistan, there are multiple levels of custody. And just if you can elaborate a little bit as to how to unlearn that process of being somebody else being a custodial of your life, of your gender or of your identity.
I think that I have to do this quickly because I think they have experiences to share too. I think that I began to realize that I had been involved in community work and political work, and often what changed the quality of that work was our relationships in groups with each other. We were ignorant. We engaged in gender discrimination within the groups that were supposed to be making change, and also class conflicts. So I began to realize that we had to, as you used that wonderful word, unlearn some things if we were going to be allies with each other. So I started diversity training, because what I realized, it wasn't just that I was reacting to the fact that I had been assimilated by white culture that didn't respect the things about me as an American that were African American, but also that I had to deal with the ignorance of the people in the group who were for change. Like, who wants to be involved with people in group change for people who are just doing it for your people and not doing it for everybody else? And then the other thing is that I realized that if personal is political, then political work also means changing yourself.
Yeah.
And so these women, in reading their books, they had to recreate themselves to do the work that they did. And that offered a different script. So the real work of why people resisted them is because they haven't done their work. And I think that is what's equally as important.
Azra,
Go ahead.
bolo.
She wants to know what do you want her to talk about?
Well, let's get another question. Go for it. Yes.
ठीक है.
Here.
नीलम. नहीं किसका सवाल. आपका सवाल.
Any questions? No, 3:15.
So I can just following
I'm
on-
sorry. Go ahead.
Just following on from the last question, what do you feel is the future of feminism in Pakistan when we really need to get men on board? I think that's the main thing. We can change ourselves as much as we can, but it's such a misogynistic and patriarchal society, particularly outside the urban centres. So how do you feel we can change that as women, trying to get the men on board? Because that's so important. You touched on that yourself.
I think they're going to answer, and then I'm going to talk about how we do that in the U.S. All right?
बहुत अच्छा सवाल है. You see, I always say that only women do not need to be educated and to be told to be rebellion or to be emancipated. Men in Pakistan and in subcontinent also need to be emancipated, because हम यहाँ पहुँच जाएंगे तो वो यहीं रहेंगे, ऐसे नहीं होगा. We have to coordinate the two things, and there always happens. मेरे बहुत सारे दोस्त जो हैं मर्द थे और वो शायरी पढ़ते सब कुछ करते, but the point is when I wrote the poem Farewell to Uterus, my all friends said hi यानी तो लाई देती है. But when I said have you read the title or have you read the poem, they said title से पढ़ के नहीं पढ़ा जाता, नज़्म कैसे पढ़े. The point is this: first of all, women resist, and then they understand, and same is the case with men. Men need sensation. Up till now, they look for sensation from women's writings, either it's novel or it's poetry or anything. Something sensational is not there, then say, मज़ा नहीं आया. बोलो.
मतलब मेरी किताब के हवाले से ये था कि एक तो मुझे इस चीज़ का जो हिम्मत जो बड़ी थी वो ये था कि ऑक्सफोर्ड यूनिवर्सिटी प्रेस ने इसको छापा. तो अगर कोई और इदारा होता या कहीं किस तरह से, तो लोग उसको जो है ना उसको इशू बनाकर मुख्तलिफ़ अखबारों में छापते या स्कैंडलाइज करते. अब मुझसे काफ़ी लोग पूछते हैं कि हम फ़लाँ से चीज़ इसको छापें, तो मैं उनको डरा देती हूँ कि आप अमीना सैयद से बात करें, क्योंकि उनके पास इसके हुकूक हैं और वो बड़ी सख्त है इस मामले में, तो वो डर जाते हैं. तो इस तरह से मेरा इसके स्कैंडल नहीं बना, वरना मैं उसका सामना तो कर सकती थी, लेकिन परेशानी हो सकती थी, जो कि मुझे इस इदारे की वजह से ज़रा कम हुई। अच्छा, ये नीलम भी सवाल करना चाहती है।
Shall I just quickly, in 1 minute? Attiya says that part of the reason why there wasn't a backlash against her book, or she didn't face this much criticism, was because of the credibility of the press, the Oxford University Press, which published her book. And so, people kind of understood that this was, she had the backing of an important press.
But not me.
So just quickly, there are stages of raising consciousness, right? And sometimes one of those stages is that you have to do it yourself first, so that you can internalize the power of your own experience. Then you can teach that experience. So part of what I think that women have to do in order to get more men on board is that they have to demonstrate more effectively that feminism is a tool. It's not just an identity. And it's a tool that they also need in order to express the range of their gender experience. All right? The second thing is that many of us are raising sons, right? And we are creating different examples of who they are. And so we can ask many men, do you think that the way in which you are functioning supports the identity of your son? And I think the third thing is that there are men who take the position of being feminist because they also see the connection between feminism and economic and political systems that are no longer working. So we need to be able to have conversation with those men.
Azra might like to say something.
Yes, go for it.
Mike.
एक सवाल जो एक बीबी ने किया था, मर्दों को किस तरह साथ लेके चल सकते हैं, कोई ज़रूरी है? आप जो रास्ता अपने लिए चुन रही हैं, उसमें आपको किसी की मदद की ज़रूरत है, और अगर ज़रूरत है तो वो रास्ता ना चुनें, आप मर्दों के पीछे रहें।
You have to translate that.
Yes, I have to translate that. She was responding to the question that how do we take the men with us and understand, because there is so much misogyny. She says, is it absolutely necessary to take men along with us? Is the response in a nutshell.
In a nutshell. I think if we have two hands, what I have found from women's experience is that we always have to have a duality. So we have to deal with our own selves and we have to deal with ally building. So I would say that it is not absolutely necessary in every situation. It is more efficient to do it that way. I think somebody, yes, right here. Can you, yeah. We have only about 5 minutes left, I think.
Everyone on the panel seems very accomplished and they've led very holistic, full lives. My question is, as somebody who's younger and trying to find her path, there's always something like a support system which I think we need. It's not about we need men or women, we need a family, we need, it's not just the men who are not feminists, I can talk about a lot of people, mothers especially. They're the ones who tell their daughters to stay away from a lot of things or not to follow their paths. And my story is very similar to that. So what I want to ask is, when we're trying to find where we're leading onto or what we want to do, how can we really do that when we don't have a support system and when we do not have allies? And yes, we might have some friends we make from certain groups here and there, but our families don't support us, the people who are close to us don't support us, and yes, we are in a sense financially, emotionally, right from our primary socialization, dependent on it. So it's not something we can easily break off. Like, I wish that at one point in my life, I hope that it'll be easy to do that, but not at the stage I'm at. And it's very hard for me to relate to things like, oh, you can find your way and don't listen to people. But really, given the realities of a Pakistani society and where we're coming from, how? How with lack of support?
Very good question. बहुत अच्छा सवाल है. This question relates to 60% of women. Because हमारे गांव से लेकर और शहर तक की जितनी लड़कियां हैं, when they come to the college and when they go to the hostel, they find it very difficult to stay over there, and going back home 10 कहानियाँ खड़ी होती हैं. ये बुर्का ओढ़ के आई थी, ये बुर्का ओढ़ के नहीं आई थी, इसे नकाब डाली हुई थी, इसे नकाब नहीं डाली थी. So same was with me at my age people. But questions always are there. One has to face them either alone or with the consent of mother, if you have very good understanding, or brother or father, because there are so many girls who say, okay, with the help of my father, with the help of my sister, with the help of my mother, I am up to this stage. So you have to create. You see, in my age, at that time, there was no such thing. There was no communication between father and the daughter. Hukum mano, just what I am saying, accept that. That was the answer from my mother. No argument, nothing of you. मैं तुम्हें आखिरी बात बताऊँ, the last thing I tell you. In my book, there is a paper, निकाह नामा मेरा है उसमें शामिल. तो क्यों शामिल किया उसको मैंने? बहुत सारी मेरी दोस्तें कहती है इसलिए किया, तो बताना चाहती थी तुम बशकी औरत हो. When you see that nikah nama in my English book and also Urdu book, nikah nama, all the lawyers of me, all the lawyers of Yusuf, all the witnesses of Yusuf and all of mine are there. Yusuf's signature are there. The only signature which are not there is mine. And that is my nikah nama. So, आपको पता होना चाहिए किन ऑब्स्टिकल्स के बाद हम निकले, लेकिन आज की लड़की भी वहीं खड़ी है. उसे उसी तरह खड़ा होना है जैसे मैं गिर के खड़ी हुई थी. गिर के खड़ा होना पड़ता है. आप मुस्तकिल खड़े नहीं रह सकते.
मैं सिर्फ एक बात करना चाहती हूँ, और जिसके हवाले से मैंने सारी ज़िंदगी गुजारी. जब मुझे बुर्का पहनाया गया 12 साल की उम्र में, तो 4 नकाबें डाली गई थी. तो जब मेरे बाप मेरे साथ जा रहे थे तो मैं गिर गई. उन्होंने कहा क्या हुआ? मैंने कहा इन 4 नकाबों पे नज़र नहीं आ रही. उन्होंने कहा एक उलट दो. उलट दी. फिर मेरे बड़े भाई मेरे साथ जा रहे थे, मैं फिर गिर गई. उन्होंने कहा क्या हुआ? मैंने कहा नज़र नहीं आ रहा. उन्होंने कहा चलो नकाब उलट दो. उलटते नकाब. इस तरह मेरी 4 नकाबें उलट गई. अब फिर मैंने ये सजेस्ट किया कि मैं चादर नहीं ओढ़ लूँ, तो मैंने चादर लपेट ली. खुश हुए घर वाले बहुत, लेकिन चूँकि मेरे बाल बहुत खूबसूरत थे और घुंघराले थे और शक्ल अच्छी नहीं थी, तो अब मुझे ये था कि मैं अपनी शक्ल तो लोग देख रहे हैं, पसंद नहीं कर रहे, तो मेरे बाल बहुत खूबसूरत हैं. तो मैं जब जरा सा आगे निकलती थी घर से, तो मैं वो चादर को उलट लेती थी और फिर बेशुमार लौंडे मेरे पीछे लग जाते थे. तो सारी ज़िंदगी मैंने अपने आप को इसी तरह चलाया, अपना रास्ता निकालने के लिए कि 1 नकाब, 2 नकाब, 3 नकाब, 4 नकाब, और बस.
This was a quintessentially Azra story, that when she was 12 years old and she was asked to wear the niqab, so there were 4 layers to it. And so, when she was walking with her father, she stumbled and he said, why are you stumbling? And she said, because I can't see. So he said, oh, you can put 1 layer back. Then she was with her brother and the same thing happened, and so the 2nd layer went. And so it went that she managed to get all 4 back. she thinks that her hair was the most beautiful feature, and so she actually wanted to show her hair off, which she couldn't. So the minute she left home, she would she would uncover her hair. She would just throw her veil off. And so she said, basically, that I've always found strategies in my life to move ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to answer it in my way, and then I'm going to ask the person next to you to ask a question. First of all, I think that your question is one of the most powerful ones for me. Just for you to stand up and ask, in my time, with what I have to do, how do I do it? But I'm not going to tell you an answer that you're going to love, because it's going to require something of your heart and your soul and your mind. One, you're going to have to learn how to reinvent yourself over and over and over again. Two, I think that one of the things that helped me is that I had intergenerational mentors. I learned from what older women had done, and I also learned from what young women were doing. And that wasn't my habit to do that. I also had to learn from people outside of my race and my ethnicity. And that was extremely difficult, because I grew up in a closed, only keep knowledge to your own community way. And the third thing is that I made a commitment to live a lifestyle that was simple, so that I could use my resources for political work. So I didn't buy the big house and have the fancy car and all of those things that my education would have given me, because I wanted to do political work all of my life and raise my kids seeing that example with me. So what is in essence that means is that there will be very little hand-holding if you become a rebel. There will be days in which you will have to learn how to manage your despair. And there will be days when you will just enjoy cooking the food and eating it, because that might be the only victory you have that day. Thank you. Yes.
Just now, listening to this very, very interesting session, I find that I think language plays a very important role. Kesho, you wrote in English, and of course, I think your community, at least although they do have what they call code switching, but what difference did that make? And all the others, my sisters here, they wrote in their own language, Sindhi for one and Urdu for the second. What do you think what impact does that have? And then also translation, how like Kishwar could tell us, even the others have been translated.
All right, I'm going to go first because I think they have more to say about that. The only language I have as a descendant of a slave is English. And I believe Audre Lorde's idea of using the language to dismantle the master's house is very important. So I use the language that I had. But because America, it has linguistic diversity, but the privileged language has been English, I also wrote in Black English, and I code switched, so that when people read my work, they realized that the metaphors I use, the stories that I use, hit their heart. And that was more important. That kept me real honest, and it also kept me learning from people in my community. That is the power of writing.
सवाल कोई रह गया तो कर लो, टाइम खत्म हो रहा है. हो गया ना, तुम सुना दूं.
You have one more.
नीलम सवाल करना चाह रही.
We have one more. We have one more time for one more. Okay.
No. नीलम. हाँ.
Yes, I wanted to ask. All these ladies are my friends. I am also
She's a writer.
Sorry. Pakistani male writers.
Just a minute. She's coming.
Okay. I would like to say that Pakistani male writers always take advantage of being a man, and they get away with a lot of stuff. Since long times they've been writing about their memoirs and their life experiences, their love affairs, all that. But when it comes to women, they always say, oh, a woman, she cannot write about that. So I mean, I admire these ladies. They're my friends, most of them. But I would like to know, honestly speaking, could you tell it all? Could you held some of it? Could you told part of it? It's just for my own knowledge, really.
क्या पूछना चाहती?
I mean, your story.
किसी का नाम पूछना चाहती है?
No. I mean, like your life story. Were you able to write it all or hold something back?
You see, मैंने शुरू में बताया था, तो भूल गई हो, मेरी तरह हो गई हो. My book is 50 years what women of Pakistan have been through.
Yes.
Including me. It is written in the first gender. And the translation is done by a friend is sitting, Durdana Subro. She has done the translation. And हर दफ़ा तर्जुमा करते पूछती थी, अम्मा मैंने एक लाइन लिखी थी, दरिया में नीम उगाने आई थी. वेरी डिफ़िकल्ट सर्कमस्टांसेस. तो शिक्षक क्या मतलब है, दरिया में नीम उगाने आई थी? मैंने कहा नहीं उग सकता दरिया में, इसलिए इस तरह का फ़िक्रा. फिर ये था कि अम्मा के लिए फ़िक्रा था कि सब्र के कटोरे का पानी बार बार ख़त्म हो जाता था. शियास क्या हुआ कि मैंने कहा ये इसलिए है कि बहुत दफ़ा सब्र करके तो 3 बीवियों के बाद चौथी बीवी मेरी अम्मा आई थी, इसलिए वो 3 सौतेली बेटियों के साथ गुजारा मुश्किल हो रहा था. तो राइटिंग is over there. But you see, the difference in the two languages is there because my language is Urdu. It has its own typical, my mother's language and muhavra and everything. And the English has its own connotations. So the translation, very nice. But ये ज़ायक़ा अलग है.
Thank you.
Can I ask you a question and I'll ask it in Urdu as is, okay? My question is, do you feel that you've told your story, or there's plenty more? Because basically that, अच्छा भाई मैंने उर्दू में कहा था.
Okay, I have to say that you were the first person who wanted to ask a question. So I think we're going to let someone respond to that, but our time is up. So my quick response to that is that one of the reasons that women began to write serial autobiography is that they told their stories at the time to teach the lesson that they wanted to teach. And I think that is the power of innovation of women's autobiography. That is what we're seeing across the country. But let me say this. The personal story I told had a political agenda, just like the stories that men have written. They are not the only interpretation of democracy, of love, of passion, of sexuality, of soul, and of religion. There are multiple stories. And I think that autobiography allows you to tell the story that you need to tell at the time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's fresh it up. Good. It is good that you are here and people know that how the black American think better than white American. Second very important thing I want to tell, that if you want to read poetry, read black American women poetry and you will find the real life.
Thank you.